Welcome to episode 3 of the Integration Journal here on the Vital Point podcast. I'm Jonathan Schechter, your host. These are a little bit of a new experiment that I've been doing for 2024, where I veer a little bit off of the format of the podcast to share about my personal journey, my personal integration, and what's alive in that process for me right now. And one thing that, has come up in the process as I've started, this is the third episode, is really needing to pay attention to someone that has been really influential to me. I really admire his ethos and just his whole process and attitude about art and the craft. And that's Rick Rubin. And I've been reading The Creative Act, which was a book he came out with last year. Really fantastic. Can't recommend it enough if you're an artist. And even if you're not an artist, I think it's a fantastic read. And I was listening to him on the Huberman Lab podcast. And there were a couple of things that jumped out. The first one was to treat art as if it was a diary entry. And from that perspective, that there's nothing wrong. You wouldn't judge your diary entry. You certainly wouldn't judge anybody else's diary entry. And to stop judging your art. And it was funny because after I did the second episode of the Integration Journal, I immediately started to judge it. I immediately started to think, oh, this isn't that good. I should redo it. I should do it over. Maybe I shouldn't even put this out. There was a lot of doubt and sort of self-criticism. And it's completely against the idea that I had with putting out that Integration Journal, which was to have a raw diary basically of my integration experience, to not edit it, because I don't do a lot of editing for the Vital Point, but I do some. And there's things that I do in post to it, and so far I haven't added any thumbnails to YouTube. I haven't actually even put them on the audio platforms at all yet. I will pretty soon. I want to have a few episodes just so people can get like a flavor and not thrown off by it. But I felt all those doubts come up. And so listening to that podcast helped me to just say, screw it. I'm going to put this podcast up and not really worry about it. And that's really been something I've been trying to live up to with the podcast the whole time. So that was sort of the first Rick Rubin kind of reference or inspiration that I wanted to mention. The second was more in line with what I wanted to talk about during this journal. It's something that I've been working on personally. It's not necessarily part of my psychedelic integration, but it's something that is part of my healing and something that I've been going through processing. So he said this during the Huberman Lab podcast. Again, this is Rick Rubin on the latest Huberman Lab podcast. He's been on a couple of times. We experience something and then make up a story to understand it ourselves. And then forevermore, when we tell that story, it was our version of the experience. But we don't know that that's what happened. That's just our take on it. And this resonated so strongly with me. In fact, hearing that was like, oh, I got the topic for journal number 3. I have been going through something recently that has been a little bit shocking to me. If you've followed the podcast or you've been following me on any platform for a while, you've probably heard me talk at some point about my marriage that ended. That in a lot of ways, at least according to my version of the story, helped to start the journey of self-discovery and healing that has led me into the work that I'm doing now as an integration specialist, as a breathwork facilitator. Definitely was the catalyst for a lot of changes in my life. Before a few years before I got divorced, I knew I wanted to stop drinking. I didn't accomplish that fully until I actually left. I also ended up losing a lot of weight, partially from not drinking, but partially from just changing my diet, changing my lifestyle. It was my real formal introduction into working more intentionally with psychedelic and plant medicines, including my introduction to ayahuasca, to 5-MeO DMT, and starting to work with mushrooms in a different way than I had ever before. Because honestly, before that divorce, I didn't really know what integration was. Like, it wasn't something that was really in my consciousness. A few times a year would do these, Terrence McKenna heroic mushroom journeys, 5 grams in darkness by myself. And they would be very introspective, very illuminating, very insightful, but I didn't really know what to do with those experiences. Outside of some journaling, I wasn't actively doing any sort of integration work. And until 2018, I wasn't actively meditating every day. I didn't know what breath work was. I had never taken an ice bath. So there were a lot of things, I'd never been in a sweat lodge. There were a lot of things that came out of that period of discovery and healing right after the divorce that really changed the trajectory that I was on in a lot of ways. What I wanted to do with my life and who I thought I was, and who I thought I was, I think was kind of what set off this current thing I wanted to share with you, because I've gone through these experiences recently where it feels like I look around and I don't really know who I am, especially in times of stress. And, I have the desire, the impulse to fall back on older coping strategies that just don't fit who I am anymore. And I look around and I go, wow, I have a completely different job, a different career, different friends, different spouse. My life is totally different, to the point where I'm not sure if I would recognize myself if I, passed myself on the street, me now and, me 5 years ago. And so that's been something that I've been working through, and, both with my regular therapist. Had a really great session with Otto Mayer, who's been on the podcast, kind of focused on internal family systems. But that's been a big piece of my integration recently. And I had this experience. Well, let me back up a second. As I've explored that, one of the things that's come up is that I'm still, or maybe even more accurately, just starting to grieve the loss of that marriage, the loss of who I was. my life changed pretty dramatically in a very short period of time because I left the house that I shared with my ex-wife. I left my cats because I didn't want, I felt really kind of weird about separating them. And at least in my mind, that's what was going to happen was I was going to take one and she was going to take the other. And that felt traumatic to the cats. I didn't take too many possessions other than the ones that like were mine and she didn't use. So I basically rebuilt my life in a lot of different ways. And I guess I'm just realizing how much of a survival mode I was still in during that period and how I'm finally processing some of that. And so this grief for that relationship has come up. And then I had this experience maybe about a week ago. I'd say this happens to me once a month or so where I wake up in the middle of the night and I just can't go back to sleep. And I get to a point where I just get up because I'm tired of laying there and I've done breath work. I've maybe used my sensate. I've listened to meditations and just nothing's happening. But usually when that's happening, there's something like the wheels in my mind are turning. There's something specifically that I know that I need to get done or get out or work on, or, something that I'm being called to complete. And this time I didn't feel that. I just felt like I was awake. And so I got up and my plan was to ingest a little bit of cannabis to help me get back to sleep. But I walked into this room here that I'm in, which is, my office, my studio. And I was kind of just sort of looking around and asking myself, well, what am I going to do? Like, what should I do? What should I work on? And there was the briefest of thoughts. It was just this one little small thought that flashed across my mind. It wasn't like, again, sometimes when I'm being called to do something, there's a really loud pull. There's a really strong, clear message that I'm getting as far as what I need to be working on. And I didn't feel that. It was just this, again, momentary thought. And the thought was, write a letter to your ex-wife. And I kind of was like, that's interesting. And I sat down and I started to write, and I ended up writing about 5 pages. And as I was writing, I felt like I really discovered some things that were a little bit unexpected, I guess. The first one was how much, and this is really what I wanted to talk about, but how much of a narrative that I have about what this certain thing that happened in our marriage that is literally just my own narrative about it. Meaning that I wasn't there, but I have this whole image. I have this whole story about what happened. And, I'll just give a quick warning. I don't think it's necessary, but it's the 2024 thing to do that. I'm going to talk a little bit about trauma here. And the incident that I'm talking about was, her attempted suicide. And as I was writing and sort of writing to her my side of it, because to be honest, we didn't really talk about it. And I wrote to her about, I was leaving work. We were encouraged not to have our cell phones with us when we were out on the sales floor. And for whatever reason, I actually paid attention to that. And so, I had my phone like in my drawer, my desk drawer, and I was picking it up as I was leaving. It's about 10 o'clock. There was a voicemail, and I listened to the voicemail as I'm walking out, in a pretty good mood. And it was the message was from the nurse at the hospital where they had admitted her. And it was like, "Hey, Mr. Schechter, your wife's here. She attempted suicide. The details of that, and that she's here. Please give us a call." And I remember going and sitting in the room that the store used for art and replaying the message and calling them back and getting more details. And then I went home. I didn't go to the hospital until the morning because I was really angry. And as I was writing, I realized that I had I could see the chain of events that she took, and that it was a part of my memory, but that I wasn't there. All these images from this memory were from the description that the nurse gave me when I called and talked to them at the hospital. It wasn't even that she told me about it afterwards, and obviously I wasn't there. So it was, this version of the truth that somehow I took for the whole truth, and had become so ingrained in my consciousness and my reality that I didn't even realize that it was this narrative. And that kind of like stopped me in my tracks a little bit. And I think the process of writing the letter was very therapeutic. I discovered some other areas where there was still a lot of emotional charge. And so in that way, I thought it was really helpful. And when I got done writing the letter, I just sat there and just let myself feel. And it was really interesting because as soon as I put the notebook down, I thought, oh, look, there's this book. I've been meaning to start it. And I started to reach for it. And then I thought, oh no, you really need to just sit with this. And I talked about it with my therapist last week, and she gave me some clarity on some things. I think she pointed my curiosity towards some things. And, one of the things that she said was, so have you ever really considered her side of it? And I said, no. I've been really angry about it. And I've created this story where she did this to me, or at the very least, she didn't consider me. She didn't think about me. She abandoned me, which again goes back to a core, wound that I have from early childhood. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks that I never really considered her experience or her side of it. And I've always known on some level, especially in the last few years, like how much pain she must have been in to have actually attempted to take her life. But I don't think I felt it or felt for her or had the kind of empathy for her that, came up and has been coming up, since that letter and since the session that I did with my therapist afterwards. And I left that session, I was pretty charged up. And as I was driving home, what came up was the song by Kate Bush, Running Up That Hill, which is a fantastic song. If you've never heard it, listen to it after the podcast. It's one of my favorite songs. And I never, until that moment, considered how angry that song is. And I put the song on. I was sitting in my driveway. I put the song on, and the song totally hit me in a different way. Like I was hearing it almost for the first time or from a completely different perspective. And as I was listening to the song, I started to feel her grief. I started to feel what she felt. And I probably sat there for about 20 minutes, just playing the song over and over and crying and just letting this grief just be with me there. And then the next day, I ended up doing a breathwork journey. And again, pretty readily, this grief came up to the surface. And I remember feeling sort of curious of like this doesn't even feel like yours. It feels like her experience. It feels like her grief. And then there was this moment where I got in my head and I was like, well, is this her grief? Is it your grief? And finally where I landed was, it doesn't really matter whose grief it is, just feel it. And I fully just let myself go into this very painful, very emotive, very cathartic place. That kind of like, I don't know if this has ever happened to you where it's almost like you want to like scrunch up or get smaller because you have so much tension that's coming up around the emotional experience that you're having. And I just let myself be with it. That was the most important thing, was just to feel it. And there was also an experience during the breath work of, again, just having this thing that's like a very strong memory, very traumatic experience for me as well as for her, obviously, that's been so defined. And all of a sudden, like really sort of almost pulling it out and being like, hold on a second. This didn't even happen the way that you're remembering it. You weren't there. So that part of it didn't happen. And the way that it felt in the breathwork journey was like, I could see, it was almost like my mind was like a river with these different tributaries and canals and like different, streams and offshoots. And like somebody came in and just like pulled a big chunk of the earth and the waterways out. And the water was like trying to find its way into knowing where to go. But yeah, it's one of the benefits of working with a good therapist is, I was having a pretty strong experience, but it was also just this simple curiosity, this simple inquiry of her asking me, have you ever considered her side of it? Have you ever wondered what she felt? And me kind of realizing, no, I don't think I have. And I feel like it has started to loosen up a lot of things, after that journey. I had a few days where I was really productive. I had a session today with my therapist and we talked about it a little bit, and it wasn't very emotionally charged. And we were kind of reflecting on, that's an interesting part of trauma healing and trauma work, is like you can have this big experience because it's ready to come out, but you can't necessarily like pick that up next week or the next day. Things come out, things finish, and things process when you're ready to heal them. It's one of the principles of breath work, right? Is like the inner healer, the inner intelligence is only going to bring up what you're ready to process and what is safe for you to process. So as much as you want to turn away, or as much as there's this desire to avoid discomfort or fear of like actually confronting this thing that is coming up for you, it's never going to come up if you're not actually ready for it. And I see that in my own work with clients, as well as obviously in this case myself. So, and it was neat because I felt that even in the breathwork journey, like I was feeling this big thing, and it was happening even after the breathwork was done, and I spent some extra time kind of processing it. And then I got to a place where I could feel like the pain wasn't going to go away today, and it was okay. Like I didn't need to fully complete, or just like there's more there, but it's okay to, like, that's enough for today. It's enough to let we've done enough for today. And I've got more breath work coming up because that's a part of my practice. I have a holotropic retreat coming up in about a month, and who knows if some of that will surface during that. But I feel good about where I'm at as far as processing, and it feels like this thing that has been slowly dawning as far as grief and processing that relationship. It feels like a big chunk of that kind of dislodged and came forward. So yeah, that's my integration journal. Probably one of the most vulnerable that I've been here on the podcast, and I appreciate you listening. I hope that this inspired you to sit with whatever discomfort you've been avoiding. We all have it, right? And it's important to just allow those feelings, allow those emotions to come up when they need to, and not turn away from them. That's how addictions start. Self-soothing when we need to just feel the feelings, feel the pain. We turn away enough and it becomes a habit. So I appreciate you being here and sharing my journey with me in this way. Uh, yeah, if you're not subscribed to the podcast, please do so. I've got 89 episodes or so for you to go through and a lot of amazing things. Obviously, most of the other show is a little bit different. Usually talking to guests, talking about simple methods to transform your life, personal transformation and integration. So I wanted to continue to share because I don't have all the answers. I'm still learning. I'm still healing. I'm still growing. And I hope that by sharing my experience and story with you, that it helps in some way. So until next time, remember that regardless of the method, the vital point is to practice. And I will keep practicing and see you next time. Take care.